The air in the first-class cabin was sterile, chilled to a precise temperature that felt less like comfort and more like preservation. Alara Vance breathed it in, a familiar, metallic taste that mirrored the cold steel and tinted glass of her corner office. From this altitude, the world below was an abstract watercolor, a pleasing but distant pattern. It was how she preferred it. Her laptop glowed with the stark blues and whites of quarterly projections, each upward trending line a brick in the fortress she had built around her life. Success was her armor, her moat, her high stone wall. Inside, she was safe, and utterly alone. A quiet disruption rippled through the hushed cabin. A man with shoulders broadened by more than a suit jacket and a small girl with eyes as deep and dark as a twilight sky stood hesitantly in the aisle. The girl clutched a teddy bear, its fur worn smooth with affection, one button eye dangling by a thread. They were a portrait of gentle, scuffed warmth, completely alien to Alara's curated world. "I'm so sorry, sir," a flight attendant murmured, her voice a frantic whisper. "The booking system seems to have double-booked your seats in Economy Plus. We're trying to sort it out. If you could just wait here for a moment." Alara's focus narrowed, a flicker of irritation tightening her jaw. This was her sanctuary, the one place where the chaos of the world was kept at bay by a thick curtain and a steeper price tag. She flagged the passing flight attendant with a discreet, imperious flick of her wrist. "I assume this arrangement is temporary?" she asked, her voice low and polished, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "First class is meant to provide a certain atmosphere. For work." She didn't look at the man and his daughter, but she felt his presence as a sudden, still weight in the air. The flight attendant flushed. "Of course, Ms. Vance." Immediately, the man, Marcus, heard her. He didn't flinch, didn't retort. He simply placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, turning her slightly so his body shielded her from Alara's cold disapproval. It was not an act of confrontation, but of quiet, profound protection. In that small, instinctive gesture, the first hairline crack appeared in Alara's fortress wall. The seating issue, it turned out, was not easily resolved. The flight was overbooked to the last seat, and Marcus and his daughter, Lily, remained in the small galley space near the front, a quiet island in the sterile sea of first class. Alara tried to ignore them, to force her attention back to the spreadsheets that had always been her most reliable companions. But her eyes kept drifting. She watched the father murmur to his child, his voice a low, soothing rumble. She watched the little girl trace patterns on the worn fur of her bear. Then, a small, furry object bounced off the plush carpet and rolled to a stop against Alara's designer heel. It was the teddy bear, Barnaby. For a long moment Alara stared at it. It was an intrusion, a piece of a world she had meticulously excluded. Her instinct was to call the attendant, to have it removed like a piece of misplaced luggage. But then she saw the little girl's wide, worried eyes fixed on her. With a sigh that felt like a betrayal of her own principles, Alara bent down. The fabric of her bespoke suit strained as she reached for the toy. It was surprisingly heavy, dense with years of being held. As she straightened up, she met the father's gaze. He was already moving toward her, a look of apology on his face. "I'm so sorry to bother you, ma'am," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. Alara held out the bear. "No bother," the words felt foreign in her mouth. She was about to turn away, to retreat back into her shell, but the child's silent, hopeful gaze held her captive. An unplanned question slipped out. "What's his name?" Marcus's expression softened. "That's Barnaby. He's seen more of the world than most people. A very seasoned traveler." Lily offered a shy, tentative smile that didn't quite reach her lips but lit up her eyes. Alara felt another small, unfamiliar tremor inside her. "You're traveling far?" Alara asked, cursing her own curiosity. "London," he replied, "for a consultation." For Lily, he didn't elaborate, and the gentle boundary in his tone was clear. He was a man who protected his daughter's privacy as fiercely as he protected her from a stranger's disapproval. There was a quiet integrity to him that was both unnerving and intriguing. He wasn't intimidated by her suit or her seat number. He saw her simply as another person on a long flight. For the first time in a decade, Alara felt seen not as a CEO, not as a symbol of power, but just as a woman. The feeling was terrifying, and, to her dismay, it felt a little like coming home. Hours bled into one another, suspended in the timeless hum of the jet engines. The sky outside deepened from azure to a bruised purple, then to an inky blackness pricked with distant stars. A violent, unexpected jolt shook the fuselage, rattling the glasses and sending a collective gasp through the cabin. The seatbelt sign chimed on with an insistent beep. Alara's hands flew to her armrests, her knuckles turning white. Her meticulously crafted composure shattered. Behind the CEO was a woman with a deep, primal fear of flying, a fear born from the terrifying loss of control. Her life was a monument to control, to bending the world to her will. Here, suspended 7 miles above the Atlantic, she was merely a passenger, her fate in the hands of strangers and machinery she did not understand. Her breath hitched, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Marcus noticed. He had been settled into a jump seat by the gracious crew, Lily asleep on his lap. He saw the panic that flashed in Alara's eyes before she could conceal it. He didn't offer a patronizing platitude. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice pitched just for her. "That's just a patch of rough air over the jet stream," he said. His tone as calm and steady as a lighthouse beam. "You can hear the engines adjusting their thrust to compensate. They're designed for this. The wings are meant to flex just like that. They're stronger for it." His words were a bomb. He wasn't telling her not to be afraid. He was giving her information, a foothold of logic in a sea of terror. He spoke with an unnerving familiarity, not as a nervous passenger, but as someone who understood the language of the machines surrounding them. "In the air," he continued softly, his eyes meeting hers, "you learn to trust the engineering, trust the training of the people up front. But mostly, you learn the difference between danger and discomfort. This is just discomfort." Alara managed a shaky breath. "I hate not being in control," she confessed. The admission torn from a place deep inside her she kept locked away. "I built my entire life on it." Marcus gave a small, understanding nod. "Control is mostly an illusion anyway. We think we have it right up until the moment we don't. The only real power we have is in how we react when the floor drops out from under us." The turbulence subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving a profound stillness in its wake. But the conversation lingered. The shared moment of vulnerability had altered the air between them, charging it with a new and fragile intimacy. For the rest of the flight, they talked, not as a CEO and a working-class father, but as two people suspended between worlds. Alara found herself speaking of her company, not with the predatory jargon of the boardroom, but with the passion of a creator. She spoke of the late nights, the impossible problems, the sheer joy of building something from nothing but an idea. She spoke of the code and the concepts as if they were living things. In return, Marcus spoke of Lily. He described her quiet world, her fierce imagination, her uncanny ability to see the truth of things without needing words. He spoke of learning to be both a father and a mother, of the humbling, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful responsibility of being a child's entire universe. He never mentioned his own past or his work, but his love for his daughter was a tangible presence, a warm light that filled the small space between them. At some point, Lily stirred. She sat up, blinked sleepily, and then seemed to take in the new, softer atmosphere between her father and the sharp-edged woman. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a worn drawing pad and a handful of crayons. For the next hour, she worked with silent, solemn concentration. Finally, she tore the page from the pad. She hesitated for a moment, then shyly held it out to Alara. Alara took the drawing. Her breath caught in her throat. On the page, rendered in the charming, wobbly lines of a child, was a glass tower that stretched into the clouds. Inside the highest window stood a queen with a sad face and a glittering, lonely crown. Far below, on a patch of green grass, A man and a little girl were holding hands. The girl was holding up a single, bright red flower towards the tower. It was her. She was the queen in the glass tower. Her office was a marvel of modern architecture, a skyscraper of steel and glass that dominated the city skyline. And God, she was so lonely. A single, hot tear escaped her eye and splashed onto the paper, smudging the crayon. She wiped it away with a fierce, angry motion, mortified by her own lapse in control. But the damage was done. The innocent, unfiltered truth of a child's drawing had bypassed every defense she had ever erected. It had walked straight through the fortress gates and found the prisoner locked inside. The drawing lay on the tray table between them, a silent testament. Alara felt stripped bare, her polished corporate armor rendered useless by a piece of paper and a wax crayon. The vulnerability was terrifying, but it was also a relief. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "The person I built the company with," she began, her voice barely a whisper, the words tasting of rust from disuse. "He was my partner, in every sense. I thought we were building a life together, but he saw it only as a ladder. He tried to take it all, to cut me out, to claim my work as his own. He taught me that trust is just another word for liability." She didn't name Julian. She didn't need to. The wound was there, palpable in the air. Marcus listened, his expression unclouded by judgment or pity. He simply held the space for her, letting her pain exist without trying to fix it. When she fell silent, the quiet stretched, comfortable and deep. Then he offered a piece of himself in return. "I used to fly," he said, his gaze distant, as if watching a memory play out on the dark cabin window. "For the Air Force, F-16s. The sky. It wasn't just my job, it was my home. The noise, the speed, the feeling of leaving the whole world behind you. I loved it." He paused, his hand gently stroking Lily's hair as she dozed against his shoulder. "My wife, Sarah, she loved it too. She understood. After we lost her, something in Lily went quiet. The world became too loud for her. The constant moving from base to base, the roar of the jets, my absences. It was too much. She started to withdraw into a world only she could enter. Her doctors said she needed stability, stillness, a safe harbor." He looked directly at Alara, his eyes clear and full of a love so fierce it was almost shocking. "So I made a choice. She needed roots more than I needed wings. I traded the cockpit for a workshop. I build things with my hands now. Quiet things. Things that last." This was the second twist, the second piece of the puzzle that was Marcus Thorne falling into place. He wasn't just a wise, gentle father. He was a warrior who had laid down his sword, a pilot who had grounded himself for the sake of his child. He understood sacrifice in a way Alara, who had only ever known how to accumulate, could barely comprehend. As the weight of his confession settled between them, a sudden, violent shudder rocked the plane, far more severe than the earlier turbulence. A high-pitched alarm began to shriek from the direction of the cockpit, an electronic sound of pure panic. The cabin lights flickered erratically, casting the faces of the passengers in stark, terrifying flashes of light and shadow. This was not discomfort. This was danger. Panic erupted like a contagion. People screamed. A flight attendant, her face ashen, stumbled into the aisle, gripping the seats for support. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and breathless. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, we have a critical instrument failure and..." The transmission cut to static. A different voice, a junior flight attendant, grabbed the intercom phone, her voice trembling uncontrollably. There's been a medical emergency in the cockpit. Both pilots, they're unresponsive. Is there anyone on board? Please, is there a pilot on board? Does anyone on this aircraft know how to fly a plane?" The question hung in the air, a death sentence suspended in the shrieking of the alarm and the terrified sobs of the passengers. The floor seemed to drop away from Alara, not just the physical floor of the plane, but the entire foundation of her life. Her company, her stock portfolio, her penthouse apartment, her strategic 5-year plan. All of it dissolved into meaningless absurdity. What was a market cap in the face of a freefall? What was the value of a hostile takeover defense when you were about to be consumed by the cold, indifferent ocean? Her carefully constructed world, her fortress of control, had been a house of cards, and the wind was now howling through it. She saw her life not as a triumph of will, but as a series of acquisitions, a collection of things that could not help her now. She was going to die here, in this sterile first-class cabin, a stranger among strangers. The terror was absolute, a cold, black void that threatened to swallow her whole. Through the fog of her own fear, she looked at Marcus. While the cabin descended into chaos, he was an island of preternatural calm. His face was a mask of intense focus, his eyes scanning the cabin, assessing, calculating. He was not panicking. He was working the problem. Then his gaze fell on Lily, who was awake now, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored Alara's own. In that instant, Marcus looked at Alara. Their eyes locked across the small space, and a lifetime of communication passed between them in a single, silent second. He had to go. She had to stay. He was the only one who could save the plane. She was the only one who could save his daughter. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a decisive click. He leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead, a gesture of infinite love and a heartbreaking farewell. He looked back at Alara, and his next words were not a request, but a transfer of command, a sacred trust. "Stay with her," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Keep her safe." He was entrusting his entire world, his heart, his reason for being, to a woman who, just hours before, had dismissed him with a cold glance. He was betting his daughter's life on the hope that the sad queen in the glass tower had something more inside her than ice. He stood up, his presence filling the aisle. "I'm a pilot," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that silenced the nearest screams. "Command pilot, United States Air Force, retired. I can fly this plane," and then he was gone, moving with swift, undeniable purpose toward the cockpit, a man walking toward his destiny. Alara's choice was instantaneous. The terror for her own life was eclipsed by a fierce, primal need to honor the trust Marcus had placed in her. Her old self would have cowered, consumed by her own mortality. Her new self acted. She scooped Lily into her lap, wrapping her arms around the small, trembling girl, turning her away from the chaos of the cabin. She held her tight, creating a tiny human shield against the fear. "It's okay," Alara whispered, the words a promise, a prayer. "It's going to be okay. Your papa is a hero." She began to talk, her voice low and steady, a counter-rhythm to the frantic pulse of the plane. She told Lily about Barnaby the bear's adventures, about his travels to distant, magical lands. She sang a half-remembered lullaby from her own childhood, the melody cracked and off-key, but filled with a desperate sincerity. She created a bubble of calm in the heart of the storm. Lily, burrowing her face into Alara's shoulder, whispered a single fragile word, the first Alara had ever heard her speak. "Barnaby." Tears blurring her vision, Alara fumbled for the worn bear and pressed it into the child's hands. "Barnaby's right here," she choked out. "We're all right here, and we're going to be safe." In that moment, comforting this child, she was no longer the CEO of Vance Innovations. She was just a woman, holding onto the most precious thing in the world. An eternity passed in the space of minutes. The plane continued its sickening lurches, the alarms still wailing. Every creak of the fuselage was a harbinger of the end. Then, a click over the intercom, followed by a wave of static. And then, a voice. "This is the flight deck. This is Marcus Thorne." The voice was pure, undiluted calm. It was the voice of command, of absolute competence. A wave of collective relief so powerful it was almost a physical force swept through the cabin, silencing the sobs. "There was a medical emergency, and the flight crew is incapacitated. I have control of the aircraft. I have a passenger with a private pilot's license assisting me as co-pilot. We have stabilized the plane, and we are diverting to Gander International Airport in Newfoundland. Cabin crew, Please prepare for an emergency landing. He spoke with no drama, no fanfare. He was a professional doing his job. But to the 200 souls on board, he was a savior. The landing was rough, a controlled crash more than a graceful arrival. Fire trucks and ambulances raced alongside the runway, their lights painting the cabin in strobing flashes of red and white. The moment the wheels screamed against the tarmac and the plane shuddered to a halt, the cabin erupted. Cheers, applause, hysterical, grateful tears. Officials and paramedics stormed the plane. Alara kept Lily sheltered in her arms, shielding her from the disorienting chaos. She remained in her seat, her entire being focused on the small child in her lap, until she saw him. Marcus emerged from the cockpit, flanked by airport officials. His face was etched with exhaustion, his shirt soaked with sweat, but he stood tall. He was no longer the quiet man from the galley. He was a hero, bathed in the grateful gazes of every passenger he had just saved. But his eyes didn't scan the crowd. They searched urgently until they found her. He walked past the clapping passengers, past the officials trying to ask him questions. He walked straight to her. He knelt, and Lily launched herself from Alara's arms into his. He held her, burying his face in her hair, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, profound relief. After a long moment, he looked up at Alara, his eyes raw with an emotion she couldn't name. It was gratitude, respect, and something deeper, something that resonated with the shattered pieces of her own heart. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of all the lives he'd saved, and the one life that meant more than all of them. Alara could only nod, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. The glass walls hadn't just cracked. They had been pulverized into dust, and for the first time in forever, she could feel the sun. 1 year later, the sun streamed into a warm, rambling backyard, illuminating a garden that was riotously, unapologetically alive. A year ago, it had been a patch of neglected weeds. Now it was a tapestry of color and life. Alara, on her knees in the soft earth, her designer suit long replaced by faded jeans, laughed as Lily explained the very complex social hierarchy of the ladybugs living on a rose bush. Lily's voice, once trapped in silence, was now a constant, bubbling stream of chatter, the soundtrack to Alara's new life. Across the lawn, at a sturdy workbench, Marcus was meticulously reassembling the intricate brass gears of an antique grandfather clock. His large, capable hands, the same hands that had wrestled a 200-ton aircraft from the sky, now moved with a jeweler's precision, bringing something broken and forgotten back to life. He was fixing time, restoring a past to give it a future. On a small patio table, Alara's phone lay screen down. It had buzzed a few minutes ago with a message from her COO. "Market cap at an all-time high. We won." "You did it." She hadn't even glanced at it. She had won the battle for her company months ago, but on her own terms, with an integrity she hadn't known she possessed. That victory, once the singular focus of her existence, now felt like a footnote in a much grander story. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and walked over, his shadow falling over her. He watched Lily chase a butterfly, a deep, contented smile on his face. He held out his hand to Alara. In his palm lay a small songbird, carved from a single piece of light-colored wood, its details perfect and exquisite. "I made this for you," he said softly, "for the woman who taught my daughter how to fly again." She took it, her fingers brushing his. The warmth of his hand was as real and solid as the earth beneath her knees. They stood together, a quiet, comfortable unit, watching the little girl who was the center of their shared universe. Alara Vance finally understood. The fortress she had built wasn't designed to keep the world out. It was a prison she had built to keep herself in. True success wasn't measured in stock prices or market share. It was measured in the rich soil of a restored garden, the steady tick of a mended clock, and the courageous, beautiful sound of a safe landing in someone else's heart.